Dad, you don't belong here anymore. You're not really family." Those were the words my own daughter, Emily, spat at me across her kitchen table in Dayton, Ohio, while her husband sat there smirking, sipping coffee out of the mug I bought him for Christmas 2 years back. I just sat there, staring at her, feeling my chest cave in. My little girl, the one I carried on my shoulders through the county fair, the one I stayed up with all night when she had the flu at 8 years old, was now telling me I didn't matter, like I was some stray dog who had wandered into their warm home. Before I continue, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back. My name's Richard Hale. Folks, around town just call me Rick. I'm 62 years old, born and raised right here in Ohio. Worked at the same auto plant for nearly 4 decades. Morning shifts, double shifts, whatever it took to keep a roof over our heads. I wasn't perfect, but I never missed a mortgage payment, never left my kids hungry, and never once complained when the foreman barked at me like I was still 25. I married young. Too young, maybe. Linda, my ex-wife, was a sharp woman. Always had that way of making you feel 2 inches tall and grateful she noticed you at all. We lasted nearly 30 years before she decided she wanted more excitement and ran off with a realtor from Cincinnati. Divorce hit me hard, but I told myself, at least I still have Emily and Matt. My kids were my anchor, or so I thought. After Linda left, I put every ounce of myself into helping Emily through college, and Matt with his first house loan. I co-signed papers, I pulled from my 401k, I drove old beat-up Chevys while they drove fresh leases. I figured, this is what a father does. He builds, he sacrifices, he sets his kids up so maybe they don't have to break their backs the way he did. But the cruel thing about life? Sometimes the more you give, the less you're respected. Emily married a man named Brandon. Slick smile, polished shoes, always talking about investments and networking. He never once looked me in the eye like an equal. And the longer they were together, the more distant Emily became. Calls grew shorter. Holidays turned colder. Until finally, that morning, she looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't family anymore. I remember the way the kitchen smelled, like burnt toast and expensive coffee grounds. I remember the sound of their fridge humming, like nothing had changed except everything. "Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm your father. What are you talking about?" She folded her arms, like a lawyer cross-examining me. "You don't contribute here. You're always lingering. Brandon and I are building a life, Dad. You're in the way." Brandon leaned back, grinning. "It's nothing personal, Rick. Just, you've had your time, right? Now it's ours." That word, "had your time," felt like a blade twisting in my chest, as if 62 years of sweat and calluses meant I was expired goods. I pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping across the hardwood. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. But something inside me shifted. That quiet, dangerous shift a man feels when he finally realizes he's been taken for a fool. I drove home in silence, my old Ford rattling down Route 35, the fields on either side just beginning to frost. I couldn't stop hearing her voice. "You don't belong here anymore." And that's when I remembered something I'd signed years ago, back when Linda left and we divided up the property. Emily thought I was just some washed-up old man hanging around her life like an unwanted guest. But what she didn't know was that the house she and Brandon were living in, the very roof over their heads, still had my name tied to it in ways they'd never bothered to check. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't going to argue with them. I wasn't going to beg, was going to take back what was mine. When I got back to my house, the little two-bedroom place I'd kept after the divorce, I sat in the recliner with the TV flickering some game show I wasn't really watching. My hands were shaking, not from age, not from weakness, but from pure disbelief. I kept asking myself, how does a daughter turn on her father like that? The next day, I drove down to Miller's Diner on Main Street, the kind of place where the coffee is always burnt, but refills are endless. Old-timers like me fill the booths before the sun comes up, trading stories about bad backs and grandkids. I slid into my usual booth, ordered black coffee, and tried to make sense of things. "Rick, you look like hell," said Tommy Jenkins, a buddy of mine from the plant. He slid in across from me, his work jacket still covered in grease. "Family? Trouble?" I muttered. He raised an eyebrow. "Kids?" "Yeah. Emily," I sighed, "told me I wasn't family anymore. Right there in her kitchen." Tommy whistled low. "That's cold. After everything you did for that girl?" "After everything," I echoed, staring into the coffee like it had answers. The truth was, this wasn't the first time she'd cut me. A year earlier, she'd skipped my birthday dinner without a word. At Thanksgiving, she forgot to save me a seat. And Brandon, he made it worse. Always dropping hints about nursing homes, about how guys Rick's age should be thinking about retirement communities. I swallowed the bitterness like bad medicine. But sitting in that diner, I realized they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. That evening, I called Emily. "Hey, Dad," she answered, her voice flat. "We need to talk," I said. "We already talked," she cut in. "I don't think dragging this out is healthy for any of us." Healthy? That word stung. Like my existence was some kind of disease. "I'm not dragging anything out," I said slowly. "I'm just making sure you understand what you're saying to me. You're telling me I don't belong, that I don't matter." Silence for a beat. Then her voice, sharp. "You don't, Dad. Not anymore. I have my own family now. Brandon and we're moving forward. You're the past." I clenched the phone so tight my knuckles popped. Brandon's voice came on next, faint in the background. "Just cut it off, Em. He'll get the hint." Click. They hung up on me. I sat there in my little living room staring at the framed photo. On the wall, Emily at her high school graduation, my arm around her shoulders, both of us grinning like fools. Back then, I thought she'd always need me. Back then, I believed blood meant loyalty. But that phone call sealed it. They didn't just want me out of their lives, they wanted me erased, and that's when the bigger picture started to form. Deet pulled out the old lockbox from my closet. Inside were papers I hadn't touched in years. Mortgage statements, divorce settlements, deeds. And there it was, clear as daylight. When Linda and I divorced, I never signed over full ownership of that house to Emily. Technically, I still held rights. Half the deed sat under my name. They thought they owned it outright. They thought they were untouchable. But in this country, paper speaks louder than words. I drove down to the county clerk's office the next morning. The woman at the desk, Mrs. Dalton, had been working there since I was a teenager. She squinted at me over her glasses. "Rick Hale, been a long time." "Need to check on a deed," I said. "Property on Maple Avenue, my daughter's place." She typed it into the computer, humming. Then she looked up, surprised. "Well, would you look at that? Still got your name attached. Joint ownership, with survivorship rights. Means they can't sell or refinance without you. I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. As I walked back out into the crisp Ohio air, my heart felt heavy but steady. Emily had told me I didn't belong. Brandon had laughed in my face. But they were about to learn something important. I wasn't powerless. And the next time we talked, I wasn't going to be the man begging for scraps of respect. I was going to be the man holding the cards. That night, I barely slept. The old clock on my wall ticked loud enough to drive me crazy. But my mind was louder. Every word Emily had said kept replaying. You don't belong. You're the past. I kept asking myself, what kind of father lets his own child treat him like that? By morning, I had my answer. Not me. Not anymore. I poured myself a cup of weak coffee, sat at the kitchen table with that deed spread out like a battle plan, and made a decision I'd never thought I'd make. I was going to fight my daughter. Not with fists, not with shouting, with the same weapon Brandon loved to brag about, paperwork. First stop was Greer and Associates, the only law office in town that still had wood paneling and smelled like old books. Harold Greer had been drawing up wills and handling property disputes in Dayton for 40 years. He was tall, bald, with glasses that always slid down his nose. Rick Hale, he said, shaking my hand. Haven't seen you since. What? The divorce? Yeah, I said quietly. And that's why I'm here again. I laid the deed on his desk. He adjusted his glasses, scanned it, and whistled. Well now, looks like you've still got a pretty strong claim here. Joint tenancy. They can't legally shove you out. You've got rights. Rights they don't even know about, I said. He looked at me over his glasses. So, what exactly do you want to do? I leaned back in the chair, folding my arms. I want them to understand they can't erase me. I want justice, Harold. They told me I wasn't family anymore. Fine, but I'm not going to let them live in my house while treating me like a stranger. Harold tapped his pen against his desk. You could file to partition, force a sale, or you could reclaim partial occupancy. Either way, it'll shake their little castle. I nodded slowly. Draw it up. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter, like I'd finally stopped letting them walk over me. But in small towns, word spreads faster than wildfire. By the next afternoon, folks at Miller's Diner were already whispering. Did you hear about Rick Hale? One woman muttered over her meatloaf. Taking his own daughter to court. That's what I heard, said another, shaking her head. I sat in my booth, sipping coffee, pretending not to hear. But I heard every word. Some pitied me. Some judged me. But not one of them knew the full story. Not one of them had sat at that kitchen table, listening to their child erase them. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was Emily. Dad, what the hell is going on? She snapped, the second I answered. I stayed calm. I don't know what you mean. Don't play dumb. Brandon just got a call from the county office. Something about property rights? About you still being on the deed? Is this true? Yes, I said simply. Her voice cracked, half angry, half panicked. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't think I'd have to, I replied. Because I thought you were my daughter. But since you made it clear I don't belong, I decided to protect what's mine. Brandon's voice came on the line, loud and sneering. You think you can scare us, old man? You don't have the guts to go through with this. I smiled to myself. Watch me. Click. I hung up before they could answer. For the first time in years, I felt steady, strong. like the man I used to be before life and disappointment chipped me down. I knew this was going to get ugly. Families always do when money and property get involved. But I was ready, because this wasn't just about a house. It was about dignity, and I wasn't about to let mine be stolen without a fight. The court date was set for a cold Monday morning in December. Snow lined the sidewalks in gray slush, and my old Ford groaned as I drove it downtown. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. I felt like a soldier walking into a battle he'd already accepted. When I stepped into the county courthouse, there they were, Emily and Brandon, dressed like they were heading to a business conference. Emily wouldn't meet my eyes. Brandon, though, smirked, tapping his shiny leather shoe against the tile like he'd already won. We were called into the small courtroom. Just a few benches, the judge up front and Harold by my side. The place smelled of old wood polish and faint coffee. "Case of Hale versus Hale," the bailiff called out. It felt surreal. Me versus my own daughter. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Judge Latham, looked down at us. "We're here to settle a dispute over property rights, specifically the house on Maple Avenue." Brandon leapt up like a showman. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. That house was gifted to Emily. She's lived there for years. Mr. Hale," he threw a glance at me like I was garbage, "hasn't contributed a dime. He's just bitter and trying to sabotage our life." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have documentation of full ownership?" Brandon shuffled his papers, clearly nervous. "Well, Emily's been paying the utilities and—" "Answer the question," Judge Latham cut in. Silence. That's when Harold slid the original deed across the table, tapping it with his pen. "Your Honor, the deed clearly shows joint tenancy with survivorship rights. My client, Mr. Hale, retains legal ownership of half the property. They cannot sell, refinance, or claim sole ownership without his consent." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Even a couple of folks from town had wandered in to watch, hungry for gossip. I caught Tommy from the diner in the back row, shaking, his head like he couldn't believe it. Emily finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Dad, why are you doing this to me?" The question hit me in the gut. I wanted to yell, "Because you told me I wasn't family anymore." But instead, I leaned forward, my voice calm but steady. "I'm not doing anything to you, Emily. I'm protecting myself. You and Brandon made it clear I didn't belong in your lives. But you're living in my house. You wanted me erased? Then don't expect to keep the things I built." Brandon slammed his hand on the table. "This is insane. He's trying to steal from us." The judge banged her gavel. "Quiet. Mr. Hale isn't stealing. Legally, he's asserting his rights. If you want sole ownership, you'll need to buy him out, or the property will be forced into sale and divided." Emily's face went pale. Brandon's smirk finally disappeared. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Outside the courtroom, voices buzzed. People whispered, "Did you hear? Rick Hale took back his house." In a small town, that kind of story travels faster than snow melting on asphalt. Emily caught me in the hallway, her eyes glossy with tears. "Dad," she said softly, "you don't have to do this. We're family." I looked at her long and hard, my heart aching. "Family? Family doesn't throw you out like trash. You made your choice when you told me I didn't belong." Brandon pulled her away, snapping, "Don't beg him, Em. We'll fight this." But I could see in his eyes he already knew they'd lost. The gossip mill churned all week. At the diner, folks stopped by my booth, some clapping me on the back. Others shook their heads, saying, Never thought I'd see the day a father had to fight his own daughter. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. The truth was out, and the real reckoning was still coming, because the judge had given them 30 days to decide, buy me out, or the house goes up for sale. 30 days to watch everything they thought they owned slip through their fingers, and I intended to use every single one of those days to remind them exactly who they'd tried to erase. The 30 days ticked by, like a slow drumbeat. Every week I'd drive past Maple Avenue, their house, my house, curtains drawn tight, lights on late, Brandon pacing in the living room, while Emily sat at the table with papers spread around her like storm wreckage. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just watched, because I knew the weight of reality was finally pressing down on them. By week 3, Brandon called me. His voice was tight, clipped. "Rick, listen, maybe we can work something out." "Work something out?" I said. "Like you tried to work me out of my own family?" He went silent. "You've got 2 choices," I continued. "Buy me out at fair market value, or the house gets sold. Either way, I'm done being the fool in this story." He hung up without another word. The deadline came on a bitter January morning. Snow whipped down Main Street, frosting the courthouse steps. Inside, Judge Latham asked a simple question. "Have the parties reached an agreement?" Brandon cleared, his throat, his jaw tight. We can't afford to buy him out." The judge nodded. "Then the property will be listed for sale, with proceeds split 50-50. The gavel struck, final and sharp. It was over. I walked out into the cold air, the sound of the gavel still ringing in my ears. Emily trailed after me, her voice breaking. "Dad, please, don't do this. We'll have nowhere to go." I turned. To her, my chest heavy, but steady. "Emily, I begged for a place in your life, and you told me I didn't belong. You wanted me erased. Now you're learning what it feels like to lose something you thought you could take for granted." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't cruel, just done. Word spread quick in town. Brandon and Emily forced out. House sold off. Folks whispered at the diner, at the hardware store, even at church. Heard Rick Hale finally stood up for himself. Some called me heartless. Some called me justified. But for the first time in years, I didn't care what anyone thought. When the sale went through, I signed the papers, collected my share, and walked away. Not rich, but secure. Enough to fix up my old place, maybe travel, a bit. Enough to breathe without worrying about who was laughing at me behind my back. The night I got the check, I sat in my recliner with a beer, listening to the quiet hum of my house. No arguments, no insults, just peace. I thought back to that first morning in Emily's kitchen, Brandon smirking over his coffee, Emily telling me I didn't belong, and I smiled to myself, because poetic justice had done its work. They lost the house. They lost the comfort they took for granted. And me? I gained something far more valuable: dignity. So if you're listening out there, remember this: never let anyone, not even your own blood, convince you that you don't matter. Because the moment you stand tall, the world remembers your worth. Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.